Now in here, okay. So breathing and exchange of gases. So now first, like as earlier, oxygen is utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, etc. to drive energy to perform various activities, right? So oxygen is utilized to break down these molecules, right? Carbon dioxide, CO2, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reaction. So oxygen is utilized and CO2 is released. Now, it is therefore evident that O2 has to be continuously provided to the cells and CO2 produced by the cells have to be released out. This process of exchange of O2 from the atmosphere with the CO2 produced by the cells is called the breathing. So, exchange of O2 from the atmosphere with CO2 produced by the cells. So, exchange of O2 and CO2 is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. So, it is a breathing, it is a process, but we call it as respiration. Now, like you can feel the chest moving up and down, you know that it is due to breathing, okay. Now how do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing are described. So first one is the respiratory organs. Now the mechanism of breathing vary depending among groups of animals, depending mainly on their habitats and level of organizations. So lower vertebrates like sponges, so the lower vertebrates like sponges. So the lower vertebrates like sponges, cylindrous flatworms exchange O2 with CO2 by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Now earthworms use their moist cuticle and insects have a network of tubes, that is tracheal tubes, to transport atmospheric air within the body. Now special vascularized structures called gills, that is branchial respiration, are used by most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks. Okay, gills. Whereas vascularized bags called lungs, that is pulmonary respiration, are used by the terrestrial forms for the gas exchange of gases, right? So the branchial respiration through the gills is shown in the aquatic arthropods and mollusks, whereas vascularized bags, lungs, that is pulmonary respiration by their terrestrial forms, okay. Now among vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals respire through lungs, right? And amphibians like frogs can respire through their moist skin, that is cutaneous respiration also, right? So amphibians like frogs can respire through their moist skin, that is cutaneous respiration also. So this is all, right? Now we are going to study the human respiratory system. So we have a pair of external nostrils opening out above the upper lips. It leads to a nasal chamber through the nasal passage, okay. Now the nasal chamber opens into a pharynx, a portion of which is the common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx region. The pharynx opens into the larynx region into the trachea, okay. Now larynx is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called the sound box. It is a cartilaginous bone that produces the sound production, hence it is called the sound box. Then during swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis. So there is a glottis present on the larynx. So epiglottis, it is a thin elastic cartilaginous flap that cover the glottis, okay, to prevent the entry of food into the larynx, right? And pharynx opens into the trachea through the larynx. Now trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into left and right primary bronchi. Each bronchi undergoes repeated divisions to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, ending up in a very thin terminal bronchioles. Okay, the trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. Right, the trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles. So they are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings, right? So trachea to initial bronchioles. Okay, now each terminal bronchiole give rise to a number of thin, irregular word and vascular as bag-like structures called alveoli. Now the branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprise the lungs. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprises the lungs, not the trachea. Okay, now we have two lungs which are covered by a double layered pleura with pleural fluid between them. Now it reduces friction on the lung surfaces. The outer pleura membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining. Okay, the outer pleura membrane is in the close contact with the thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surfaces. Right. The part starting with the external nostril up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part. The part starting with the external nostril up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and their ducts from the respiratory or excretory part of the respiratory system. Now the conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidifies and also brings the air to body temperature. Now exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of O2 and CO2 between blood and atmospheric air. Okay. Now we are talking about the lungs. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, right, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by the dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such a way that any change in the volume of the thoracic cavity The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such a way that any change in the volume of thoracic cavity will be reflected in the lung, that is pulmonary cavity. Such an arrangement is essential for breathing because we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. So if we change the thoracic volume, so indirectly you are going to change with the pulmonary cavity. Okay, pulmonary volume. So now respiration involves the following steps. What is respiration? It is called breathing. What is breathing? It is exchange of O2 and CO2 between the atmosphere and the body. Now, breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn and in and CO2 rich alveolar air is released out. Diffusion of gases O2 and CO2 across the alveolar membrane. Then third step is the transport of gases by the blood, and fourth step is diffusion of O2 and CO2 between blood and the tissues, and fifth stage is the utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reactions, and result release of CO2, that is cellular respiration. Okay, now mechanism of breathing. So breathing involves two stages: inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. So inspiration and expiration. Okay, now the movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs, that is intrapulmonary pressure, is less than the atmospheric pressure. Of course, always pressure flow from higher to lower, so that is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to the atmospheric pressure. Negative means they are at lower side than the atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. Now the diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles, that is external and internal intercostal muscles between the ribs, help in generation of such gradients. Now inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increases the volume of thoracic chamber in the anterior posterior axis, right. The contraction of external intercostal muscles, that is external. So in inspiration, external intercostal muscles take parts. Okay, so external intercostal muscles lift up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. So when the lifts up the ribs and the sternum, that causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. Anterior posterior axis, we are talking about the diaphragm, but when the thoracic chamber, okay, the volume increase in the dorsoventral axis, up and down. Okay, not up and down, uh, not up and down. It's like it's like uh, it's like you just imagine by yourself, right? But this is what I mean. So the overall increase in the thoracic volume causes a similar increase in volume chamber. Okay, an increase in pulmonary now an increase in pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from outside to move into the lungs. Okay, so when we increase the pulmonary volume, that decreases the intrapulmonary pressure, that leads to, and that is less than the atmospheric pressure. So from atmosphere the air flows uh, into the lungs, right? Now this is the inspiration. Now relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscle, that is external and internal. Okay, so the relaxation of diaphragm and the intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm and sternum to their normal positions and reduce the thoracic volume and thereby the pulmonary volume. Now this leads to an increase in intrapulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of air from the lungs, that is expiration. Now we have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. So we have the ability to increase the strength of the inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. On an average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. The volume of air involved in breathing movements can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in the clinical assessment of pulmonary functions. Now you can see the diagram. The first diagram is the mechanism of breathing showing. Okay, so first one is the inspiration. You can see the air entering into the lungs. Now the pulmonary volumes gets decreased, so the pressure pulmonary volume gets increased, so the pressure get decreased. Now the air entering into the lungs. Now you can see ribs and sternum raised in dorsoventral. Okay, in dorsoventral axis, and volume of thorax is also increased. Now you can see the rib cage, ribs and sternum raised, and diaphragm, it's contract. There is contraction while the inspiration in anterior posterior axis, very important. Now the second figure is expiration. As you can see, when the volume of thorax is decreased, the pressure gets increased in intrapulmonary, so it is more than the atmospheric pressure, so air expelled from lungs, that causes the ribs and sternum return to original position, which is a dome shape. Now no, no, not a dome shape, ribs and sternum return to original position. Okay, intercostal muscles get return to their original position. Now diaphragm relaxed and arch upward. Now diaphragm, it is relaxed and it is arc upward, that is a dome shape, you can see. So this is it. Now respiratory volumes. Now respiratory volumes and capacities. So the tidal volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. During a normal respiration, right, it is approximately 500 ml. That is, a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air per minute. That is 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air per minute. Right, volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration, that is breathing, that is exchange of O2 and CO2, it is approximately 500 ml. That is, a healthy man can inspire or expire up to 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air per minute. Now inspiratory reserve volume, IRV, a person can inspire by forcible inspiration. When you inspire forcibly, this is the inspiratory reserve volume, right? This average 2500 to 3000. Okay, 2500 to 3000, you see, 2500 to 3000, right? Now expiratory reserve volume, a person can expire forcible by a forcible expiration, can expire by forcible expiration. These averages like 100 to 1100 ml, like, as you can see. So just remember, tidal volume 500, then 6,000 to 8,000, then the inspiratory reserve volume like 2500 to 3000, and then expiratory reserve volume, that is 1000 to 1000 to 1100, right? So this is expiratory rhythm volume. And now residual volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. When you try to release all of your air, but it's still some air inside that remains in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. This averages like 1100 to 1200 ml. Now this is the residual volume. It's a remaining volume even after a forcible expiration. Now by adding up a few respiratory volumes described above, one can derive various pulmonary capillaries. So pulmonary capillaries are made from adding volume, adding respiratory volumes. Okay, so which can be used in the clinical diagnosis. Now inspiratory capacity, IC, total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. Now we are, so capacity, it is kind of total. Now total volume of air a person can inspire after normal expiration, it means after normal expiration you can use forcible action. So when you inspire forcibly, it is the inspiratory reserve volume. It is the inspiratory reserve volume. So tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume gets included in the inspiratory capacity. Now the expiratory capacity, the total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration can expire. It means you can expire forcibly, right? So it involves the ERV plus tidal volume. It's the same. It's kind of normal inspiration and expiration. So this is it. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume. Now functional residual volume. Now FRC, volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. When you do the normal expiration, not forcible. A residual volume was forcible expiration. The volume then remain in the lungs. But in case of FRC, volume of air that will remain in lungs after normal expiration. This includes ERV plus RV, that is expiratory reserve volume and then RV. Just remember this, right? Now vital capacity, the maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forced expiration. Okay, this includes ERV, TV plus IRV, or the maximum volume of air can breathe out after forced inspiration. So when I breathe maximally inspiration, and then how much I can expire with the same force, right? So this is like maximum to maximum. So this is vital capacity, that is ERV, TV and IRV. Now total lung capacity, that is TLC, total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of a forced inspiration. Now with all your powers, when you try to inspiration forcefully completely, now whatever inside the lungs, then that's the TLC, that total lung capacity now at this moment. This this includes RV, that is residual volume, ERV, tidal volume and IRV. So everything, right? Residual volume, ERV, TV and IRV, or vital capacity plus residual volume. So this is your all these respiratory volumes and capacities, right? Now so the exchange of gases. So the alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between the blood and tissues, right? So alveoli and blood, and then blood and tissue also. So O2 and CO2 are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on the pressure or concentration gradient, solubility of the gases, as well as the thickness of the membrane involved in diffusion, or also some important factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. Now pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called the partial pressure and is represented by PO2 for oxygen and PCO2 for carbon dioxide. Partial pressures of these two gases in the atmospheric air and the two sides of diffusion are given. Okay, now indicates a concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to tissue. Similarly, Okay, partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide at different parts involved in diffusion in comparison to those in atmosphere. So partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide at different parts involved in diffusion in comparison to those in atmosphere. So this is all comparison to the atmosphere. Now respiratory gases is O2 and CO2, atmospheric air, then alveoli, then blood that is deoxygenated, then blood that is oxygenated, and then there are the tissues. Right? So atmospheric air, so oxygen is 159, then 159, right? Now CO2 atmospheric air, that is 0.3, right? Now alveoli, so partial pressure of O2 in alveoli, it is 104, right? And CO2 in alveoli, that is 14. Now blood that is deoxygenated, so it is 40, okay, of PO2 and 45 in that is CO2. Now blood oxygenated, that is 95 of O2 and then 40 for CO2, and tissues it is 40 and 45, okay. As you just remember this table, very important. Now similarly, I am going to this line. Similarly, a gradient is present for CO2 in opposite direction, that is from tissues to blood and from blood to alveoli. Okay, as the solubility of CO2 is 20 to 25% times higher than that of O2, the amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of oxygen, right? The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers, namely the thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, that is single cell. I think squamous epithelium of alveolar wall, you can see in the diagram, that is one cell thick, okay. Namely the thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, the endothelium of alveolar capillaries, alveolar capillaries, as you can see, and the basement substance that is present between the, okay, composed of thin basement membrane supporting the squamous epithelium of single cell, and the basement membrane surrounding the single layer, and the basement membrane surrounding the single layer endothelial cells of capillaries, now in between them. So however, its total thickness is much less than a millimeter. Therefore, all the factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of O2 from alveoli to tissue and that of CO2 from tissues to alveoli. So this is the diagram. Just remember this diagram, like air in and out, that is there is the alveolar cavity, where the place where CO2 and O2 gets exchanged. Now squamous epithelium of alveolar wall, that is one cell thick, right? Then there is a basement substance. It is basement substance, it's not basement membrane, but it's written that the basement membrane, maybe basement substance make the basement membrane, right? So this is what NCERT means it. Then the endothelium of blood capillary, that is single layer, they have the red blood cells and they have the blood capillary, right? The diagram of section of an alveolus with a pulmonary capillary, right? So this one is a pulmonary capillary, okay. Now the transport of gases. Blood is the medium of transport for O2 and CO2. Blood is the medium for transport of O2 and CO2. So about 90% of O2 is transported by the, and this is what I don't like about India, you can see the garbage and whatever they advertise in the middle of the society while you are in park, and they make the noise, and the government just allow these people to roam in city and make the loudspeaker and everything. Anyways, so blood is the medium of transport for CO2 and O2 and CO2. About 97% of O2 is transported by RBCs in the blood. The remaining 3% of O2 is carried in a dissolved state through plasma. Okay, nearly 20 to 25% of CO2 is transported by RBCs, whereas 70% of it is carried as bicarbonate, and about 7% of CO2 is carried in a dissolved state through plasma. Okay, so dissolved state through plasma, so it is very important. Now like the transport of oxygen. So hemoglobin is a red color iron containing pigment present in the RBCs, right? O2 can bind with hemoglobin in a reversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. So O2 can be, it can be reversibly possible, right? To form oxyhemoglobin, it forms oxyhemoglobin, but after there are the factors which is not favorable to them, then it gets dissociated. So each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of O2. So 8 atoms. Okay, each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of O2. Now, binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of O2. So, binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of O2. Partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration, and temperature are the other factors which can interfere with this binding. Okay. So a sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the PO2. Okay, so you can see it's on the x-axis, it's like partial pressure of oxygen, and it's on the y-axis, it's like the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. Okay. Now this curve is called the oxygen dissociation curve and is highly useful in studying the effect of factors like PCO2, H+ concentration on binding of O2 with hemoglobin. In the alveoli where there is high PO2, low PCO2, lesser hydrogen concentration and lower temperature, the factors are all favorable for. So where there is high PO2, low PCO2, lesser hydrogen concentration and lower temperature, the factors are all favorable for the formation of oxyhemoglobin. Whereas in the tissue where low PO2 and high PCO2 and high H+ concentration and higher temperature exist, the conditions are favorable for dissociation of oxygen from the hemoglobin. So from the hemoglobin there is a dissociation of oxygen, right? This clearly indicates that, the graph shifts toward the right when it is the dissociation, and when it is the association, graph shifts to the left. This clearly indicates that O2 gets bound to hemoglobin in the lung surface and gets dissociated at the tissues. Every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues under normal physiological conditions. So every 100 ml of oxygenated blood, you can see, every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues under normal physiological conditions. So this is the oxygen dissociation curve, as you can see. Okay, this is the oxygen dissociation curve. Now transport of carbon dioxide. So CO2 is carried by hemoglobin as carbaminohemoglobin, about 20 to 25%. Now this binding is related to the partial pressure of CO2. This binding is related to the partial pressure of CO2. Now PO2, the partial pressure of oxygen, is a major factor which could affect this binding. Now when PCO2 is high and PO2 is low, as in the tissues, more binding of carbon dioxide occurs, whereas when the PCO2 is low and PCO2 is as in the alveoli, dissociation of CO2 from carbaminohemoglobin takes place. So here it is a carbaminohemoglobin, as I told you, like almost 20 to 25% of CO2 is carried by RBCs in the form of carbaminohemoglobin, and other 70% as bicarbonate, and other 7% of CO2 dissolved in the plasma state, right? Now you can see. So when the PCO2 is low and PO2 is high, as in the alveoli, dissociation of CO2 from carbaminohemoglobin takes place. That is, CO2 which is bound to hemoglobin from the tissues is delivered to the alveoli. So CO2 which is bound to hemoglobin from the tissues is delivered to the alveoli, is delivered at the alveoli. Now RBCs contain a very high concentration of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, and minute quantities of the same is present in the plasma too. This enzyme facilitates the following reaction in both directions. Like CO2 plus H2 in presence of carbonic anhydrous, it gives bicarbonate H2CO3. Okay, carbonic acid, bicarbonate, and carbonic anhydrous, then bicarbonate plus H plus. So at the tissue site where partial pressure of CO2 is high, due to catabolism, CO2 diffuses into blood. Blood means it has the RBCs and plasma. So CO2 diffuses into blood. It means maybe RBCs or plasma that is in dissolved state. RBCs mean it can be like carbaminohemoglobin or bicarbonate, and forms bicarbonate and H plus ions, right? So majority it forms the bicarbonate and H plus. So at the alveolar site where PCO2 is low, so at the alveolar site we can see where PCO2 is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of CO2 and H2O. So at the alveolar site where the PCO2 is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of CO2 and H2O. Towards the left side, the reaction, the above reaction we are talking about. Now the CO2 trap as bicarbonate at the tissue level. So the CO2 trap as a bicarbonate at the tissue level and transported to the alveoli is released out as CO2. Now every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of CO2 to the alveoli. So every 100 ml, every 100 ml of oxygenated blood delivers 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues, and in here every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of CO2 to the alveoli. Very well done. Now the regulation of respiration. So the human beings have significant ability to maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm to suit the demands of the body tissues, right? So it is significant ability to maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm. It can be okay. Now this is done by the neural system. Now what are they? A specialized center present in the medulla region of the brain called respiratory rhythm center is primarily responsible for this regulation, right? Another center present in the pons region of the brain called pneumatotoxic center can moderate the functions of the respiratory rhythm center, right? Neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. So neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. Which center? This one, that is pneumatotoxic center present in the pons region of the brain. So this is now a neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of the inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. Now the chemosynthetic area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, which is highly sensitive to CO2 and hydrogen ions. So a chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center. Where is the rhythm center? Present in the medulla region, which is highly sensitive to CO2 and hydrogen ions. Increase in these substances can activate these centers. Now when the substance gets increased, can activate this center, and which in turn can signal the rhythm center that is present in the medulla to make necessary adjustment in the respiratory process by which this substance can be eliminated. So when they eliminated, PO2 is get high, so oxyhemoglobin, that is breathing, gets clear or fast. Now receptors associated with aortic arch and carotid artery also can recognize changes in CO2 and H plus concentration. So aortic arch and carotid artery can also recognize the changes in CO2 and H plus concentration and send necessary signals to the rhythm center for remedial action. The role of oxygen in the regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. So it is quite insignificant. Now the disorders of respiratory system. Now first one is the asthma. So asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing. So it is a difficulty in wheezing, and it causes the wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Now emphysema. Now emphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged. So emphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged, due to which respiratory surface is decreased. Now one of the major causes of this is cigarette smoking, right? Now Now, occupational respiratory disorders. In certain industries, especially those involving grinding or stone breaking, so much dust is produced that the defense mechanism of the body cannot fully cope with the situation. Long exposure can give rise to inflammation leading to fibrosis. So, long exposure can give rise to inflammation leading to fibrosis, that is proliferation of fibrous tissues, and thus causing serious lung damage. Workers in such industries should wear protective masks. So, this is your chapter done right here. So, inflammation leading to fibrous, right? Fibrosis, that is proliferation of fibrous tissue. Long exposure can give rise to the inflammation leading to fibrosis, that is proliferation of fibrous tissue, and thus causing serious lung damage. So disorders of respiratory system, that are asthma, emphysema, occupational respiratory disorders, and all that. You can see in here the graph. This diagram. Okay, so this diagram I missed it, right? Now the diagrammatic representation of exchange of gases at the alveolus and the body tissues with blood and transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So inspired air, expired air. Alveolar air is like PO2 is 104 mmHg and PCO2 is 400 mmHg. Okay, this is alveolus, where the is alveolar cavity where the gases exchange takes place. Now you can see on the right hand side there is a pulmonary vein that joins the right atrium, and then from right atrium to the left atrium. Okay, we study. Okay, but in our heart it's like opposite, right and left. Pulmonary vein, this side is of the left side, right? So yeah, left atrium, and then left ventricle, then it goes to the systemic arteries, that is carrying oxygenated blood, that is 95 mmHg, and PCO2, that is 400 mmHg. Then body tissues, as you can see in here, in body tissues CO2 is like 45 mmHg and O2 is like 440 mmHg. And then the systemic veins, that is carrying deoxygenated blood, is PO2, that is 40 mmHg, and PCO2 is like 45 mmHg. Now it joins to the right atrium, and through the right atrium into the right ventricle. Through right ventricle it goes to the pulmonary artery. So this is it, like systemic veins carrying deoxygenated blood, right? So all this like exchange of CO2 and O2. So this is all inspiration and expiration. Now I read this line there. So this is it, like, okay. So systemic veins, systemic arteries carrying oxygenated blood, systemic veins carrying deoxygenated blood. Just see everything in here. This diagram I also explained. Now okay, this diagram was left. So this is the diagrammatic view of human respiratory system, that is sectional view of the left lung is shown. So epiglottis, epiglottis that covers the glottis so that the food does not enter into the larynx, which is sound box. So epiglottis covers the larynx. Okay, then larynx through the trachea, right? Then that trachea branches into the bronchi. Now primary bronchi, then secondary bronchi, then tertiary bronchi, then initial bronchioles. So trachea up to the initial bronchiole there are incomplete cartilaginous rings, and then there are the terminal bronchioles. Okay, and what is the conducting part from nostril, external nostril to the terminal bronchioles. So I also did your revision in here. I made you to revise it again, so you have revised like 2 times in here. So bronchus and Bronchus, as you can see, this is the bronchus, that is primary bronchi, then secondary bronchi, then tertiary bronchi. So this is the bronchus. This one is trachea, this one is larynx, this one is epiglottis. Then there is pleural membrane, okay, and then there is alveoli inside at the terminal. At the end of the terminal bronchi there are the ducts, and then there is the alveoli. So alveoli. Then there is a pleural fluid present between the pleural membranes, and then there are the bronchiole. Now bronchiole, okay, as you can see the bronchiole, and this is the diaphragm, right? And these are the lungs and cut end of the ribs. You can see the cut end of the ribs, and this is the heart. It is slightly tilted to the left side, I think. Yeah, it is slightly tilted to the left side, right? So yeah, this is all it. This is the breathing and exchange of gases. The summary has been left. I will cover it.